Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this Friday's Huessy seminar. We offer 2 to 3 of these deterrence seminars every month, and they're usually at 10 a.m. Eastern. Today, we will also have one at 2 p.m. Eastern, so please come back and hope to see you later today. My name is Alex Littlefield. I'm a Chief of Staff and Fellow at the National Institute for Deterrence Studies, or NIDS for short. And our President James Petrosky is here, as well as our host Peter Huessy, and of course our special guest who Peter will introduce momentarily. NIDS is a 501c3 think tank. Our motto is Think Deterrence. We focus on this one theme, deterrence. Deterrence is another way of saying peace through strength, and we promote this through perspective of our weekly podcast of the NIDS View and NIDS Knowledge, our journal Global Security Review, our NIDS Academy, and in-person and virtual events. Our virtual seminar allows for you to communicate directly to the speaker. Of course, when you do that, just keep your questions very short and to the point without any commentary, please. If you'd like to speak with our guest speaker, just go ahead, hit the emoji, the raise your hand, or direct message me, and I can turn on your camera and your mic. Of course, too, you're welcome to place your questions in the chat or the Q&A. Now, we are very happy here to have Professor John Rose with us, and I will hand it over to Peter.
Thank you very much, Alex, and welcome, General Rose. For those of you signing in this afternoon at 2 o'clock, we have an Assistant Secretary of State who is going to talk to us about nuclear arms control and verification, and we look forward to having you join us at 2 o'clock this afternoon. The General is here as a Missouri State University Graduate Department of Defense and Strategic Studies faculty from 2011 to today. Also, he was director of the George C. Marshall European Center for Security in Garmisch in Germany, which is well known for a site of very interesting conferences. He directed a graduate level defense and security studies program. He has overseen efforts of the college dean and approximately 30 professors from 10 nations. It's a 5 major course offerings for government officials from North America, European, and Eurasian nations, and has about 1,000 students a year. He was Director of Requirements for the U.S. Army and the Pentagon from 1995 to 1998, Director of Requirements in International Programs Branch in NATO at SHAPE headquarters in Belgium between 1992 and 1995, and he was a professor of International Relations, Defense, and Strategic Studies at the U.S. Military Academy, or West Point, between 1979 and 1981. Dr. Rose, General Rose, thank you very much for joining us. It's an honor to have you here, and it's over to you, sir.
Good. Peter, thank you so very much. It's very kind of you to introduce me. I'd like to welcome and thank all of you that are joining us here this morning. Let me just explain a little bit about my background and my interest here in nuclear weapons. When I graduated from the University of Dayton back in 1968, there was no choice about where I was going to go and what I was going to do. I had a job waiting, and it was called the draft. It was called the Army, and shortly thereafter, I ended up in Vietnam, and where I had a unique opportunity to work in the air defense field, and then in the pacification and development field. Well, I came back and I ended up going directly to Germany, spent 3 years there. And all of you recall that was a pretty difficult time for us for our nation because of Vietnam, because of a whole host of other issues that were ongoing. And it was during this time frame that I had the opportunity to go to graduate school at the University of Southern California to study the issue of international affairs, defense and strategic studies under a fellow by the name of Bill Van Cleve, who was really focused on this topic and this issue. Studies with Van Cleve completely changed my thinking because I realized I knew very little either about nuclear weapons or about some of the strategic implications of our field. I therefore had the opportunity to really delve into what all of this meant and what it was about. What really concerned me was here I was as an Army officer, and I knew so very little about what my responsibilities could be if nuclear weapons were ever used, because we were a nuclear armed force and in a field army. I just really felt unprepared, untrained for what it was we were going to do. So for some time now, I have been focused on what this topic, nuclear weapons, mean, and of course this concept of deterrence. I mean, it's a great idea. Deterrence is, in fact, our policy. We want to deter war. We want to prevent war. How does that best happen? What always concerned me was what happens if deterrence fails? And I look around, and while most of the world is going to panic, those that are in uniform are going to have to step up, because the public is going to turn and say, okay, what do we do now? And so this briefing was put together predominantly for a group of chemical officers at Fort Leonard Wood in Missouri, where I tried to talk to them about what I believe are the roles and the responsibilities, the concerns, and things that they ought to be thinking about. And so I'd like to share with you a little bit about what it was that I put together. And my intent is just to create dialogue, just to create discussion on what all of this means and what are the roles and responsibilities of our military forces should deterrence fails. I highlight a recent pamphlet by a Dr. Keith Payne that talked about the whole issue of rocket science and deterrence and rocket science. And what he mentions in fact in the title of this article is deterrence is much harder than rocket science. And when you step back to think about it, about the various aspects, the complications, the issues associated with it, you very clearly and correctly can see that golly, there's just a whole host of issues that could go wrong here and what it is we need to do. So I am currently the director of the School of Defense and Strategic Studies from Missouri State University. I'm in Fairfax, Virginia. We have a doctoral program, a master's program, and a couple of certificate programs. So if there's anyone out there that is interested in knowing more about our program, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. I'm certainly available in the Fairfax area, but I'm available at johnprose@missouristate.edu. And so with that, let's go ahead. Alex, next slide, please. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Mark Milley, when he was the Chief of Staff of the Army, he made a very clear and direct statement. And what he said is, we want to deter. And he's right. Nobody wants these wars to happen, but how do you best do that? And the only thing more expensive than deterrence is actually fighting a war. The only thing more expensive than fighting a war is fighting one and losing one. So what does that mean? How do we translate that into purposeful action? Next, please. I highlight a quote from George Washington: "To be prepared for war is one of the most effective means of preserving peace." I got to tell you, some of our friends and allies do not fully believe in that. Some of our friends and allies believe that we as Americans are far too kinetic in terms of our approach to solving many of the security problems that exist. You may or may not agree with that. However, at least based upon my perspective, I really do believe that if you best want to deter war from occurring, you've got to be prepared. You've got to be ready. You got to know what it is you're going to do, how you're going to do it, when you're going to do it. That's what drives my interest in this particular field. Next, please. Herman Kahn. I suspect all of you on this call know about Herman Kahn, but here's a quote that I think resonates. In our times, thermonuclear war may seem unthinkable, immoral, insane, hideous, or highly unlikely, but it is not impossible. I really do agree with what he says. To act intelligently, we must learn as much as we can about the risk. Next, please. I like to highlight the differences between what occurred with the atomic bombings at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and then the conventional bombings at Tokyo that brought about and ended the Second World War. You can see on there, based upon the strategic bombing survey, the square miles that were destroyed from the two atomic bombs, as well as the conventional bombing over Tokyo that occurred, as you'll see in the footnote below, over a 2-day period involving 279 sorties. Certainly the killed and missing, the wounded, I mean, that's horrendous, horrendous beyond compare. But it's something that I think puts some perspective on what occurred then. And then you have to ask, why the big difference between Hiroshima and Nagasaki? Why Hiroshima and Nagasaki? Well, I trust that many of you know Hiroshima was the munitions construction facilities for a lot of the weapons that were used by the Japanese in the Second World War. Consequently, the desire to address or use one of our atomic weapons on Hiroshima was designed to try to take out that particular capacity. Nagasaki was a coastal area, a lot of hills in there. And so the effects of the weapon itself was really varied and very different, as you can see there. But it was, again, designed to take out the maritime port facilities that were supporting the war. Next, please. This is an estimate that I have obtained. I realize it goes back to 2018, but it's the best and unclassified assessment that I have been able to come up with. Don't let anybody tell you that the United States and even Russia have not eliminated some of their nuclear stockpile. But the issue is, why do we have what we've got? Well, I'm going to address that here in a moment, because I think it's important to understand what we've got, why we've got it, and the roles that they play in this particular process. And then you can see the various countries that are headed in that direction, have nuclear weapons, and where that may take us in the future. Next, please. Nuclear technology is what, 70, 78 years old? I mean, it's been around a long time. You want to know how to build a nuclear weapon? Just go to Google. Google will show you. I used to ask students to, and as a class assignment, to come back to the next class and tell me how to build an atomic bomb. And they all could. It's not that difficult. Now, it's difficult to make it, to construct it, to build it. I'm not saying that's not true. But to know the various aspects, components, what you're going to need, and things of that nature, there's a lot of information that's out there. Next, please. Nuclear war is an enduring threat, without any doubt. And it's around, it's going to be around. We just can't ignore it. And therefore, we need to pay some attention to it. Arms control, well, we've tried. Some agreements have worked. Some of them have not worked. Do we want to put our faith in arms control efforts with an uncertain result that we have seen thus far? Certainly, I'm not saying that we should not head in that direction, but again, it has not had the overwhelming level of success that many wanted it to have. Deterrence may help prevent war, but will it work forever? And I'm not here to try and tell you that I'm favoring nuclear weapons or the use of nuclear weapons in the battlefield. I'm here to tell you that I'm not confident that we will not see nuclear weapons used in anger at some point in time during our lifetime. And therefore, what does that mean? What if deterrence does fail? What if it's not up to us to decide? What are we going to do? Next, please. All right, here's how we set the stage. Deterrence. Many, and perhaps some of you on this call this morning feel that deterrence is unreliable, uncertain, and it should be of major concern. Some of you are going to say that if you want to really deter, you have to have a denial, defensive, and retaliatory military capability. So what does that mean? How do we do that? How do we plan and prepare? How do we train? How do we organize? How do we determine how we're going to fight, survive, and sustain in an environment where nuclear weapons could be used? Some will say that a strong defense is critical in an uncertain geopolitical environment. I suspect that many of you have thoughts on all three of these parameters. Next, please. So here's the dilemma that we've got. There are some of you out there that think that nuclear weapons can be limited, thinkable, and therefore we've got to be concerned with how to fight, survive, sustain, and accomplish the mission on a nuclear battlefield, whatever that is. Now, I say nuclear battlefield, I understand fully that there are weapons of different capabilities that exist within our inventory. We used to have a lot of small yield sub-kiloton nuclear weapons. It appears they don't exist anymore. I'm not talking about the use of high yield weapons that are just going to destroy a lot of stuff, and that is unthinkable. And that leads us to the dilemma of what do we do about it? How do we think about it? And again, I turn to those that are serving in our military today and say, are you ready? Are you prepared? Is it imperative that we have a military that is ready to fight, survive, sustain in such an environment if called upon? Does that enhance deterrence? Does that not enhance deterrence? And once again, I feel that many of you on this call have different perspectives on that. And that's exactly what I wanted to do. I really want to raise the concern, raise the blood pressure of those that are trying to think through and study the complexity and the difficulty of this issue. As I've said, nuclear weapons exist. They're not going to go away. We're going to have to think through this issue. Next, please. Now, what do you want our military forces to do? Should we be prepared for nuclear warfighting operations? I ask my fellow military colleagues. And then if so, how? Or do you feel that it's really destabilizing to have a force that is trained, prepared, and ready for nuclear warfighting? Now, what if our adversaries don't believe the same as we do? Haven't we seen the Russians use live radiological isotopes in training exercises to give their field units a feel for what it is they're likely to envision? What does that mean? What does that tell you? Again, a cause for concern. Next, please. Now, listen, to those of you that are listening that are part of the military, just remember, peace is not your profession. Peace is not your profession. Deterrence is not your mission. Warfighting is the mission of the military. That has been, that always has been, and that is exactly where your focus needs to be. And so I turn to my military colleagues as I'm giving this presentation and saying, okay, what is it your role consists of when we think through this whole issue of nuclear conflict? Next, please. So to my military colleagues, again, the key question on the battlefield is where am I safe? How great is the kill zone, and what are the commander's impediments to maneuver? Now, all that can be calculated. All that can be sorted out. There's nothing new about nuclear effects that we can't sort out as we understand the size, the type, the scope that nuclear usage may result in. Whether, again, that is a small yield nuclear weapon or just whatever that may be. Next, please. So the problem, what if our adversary does not play by the same rules? What if an adversary believes that nuclear effects can be used in a militarily meaningful way? What does that do to deterrence? Does that really negate our deterrent capability? How do we think through these things? And again, I keep going back to again, what is the role that we want our armed military force to be able to do? Next, please. If we had time, I would ask all of you to address the issues that I have put up here. Obviously, we can't do that right now, but there are a number of assertions in the literature that have been highlighted for decades now about the nuclear age, nuclear weapons, nuclear strategy. And so there's probably nothing here that is new to you. It is frequently new to the military audiences that I talk to because they really haven't studied and thought through all of these issues. So whether we're saying, and some of you believe nuclear weapons are absolute weapons, well, there are a whole host of nations out there that could be nuclear weapon states today if they wanted to. They choose not to. Why do they choose not to? Is it because they believe that we, the United States, will be there to defend, protect their interest, their country? What does that mean? What about historical-based military strategy? Some people say it is not at all applicable in the nuclear era. Well, tell me what type of weapons you're going to use, what the yield of those weapons are, and I'll tell you whether or not it's going to be militarily applicable and of value on a battlefield. Some say there's no effective defense against nuclear weapons. Well, I'm not quite sure that is valid. There are a number of things that can be done. I can remember at one point in time in my military career deployed in Europe where there were actions that we took to ensure that we were able to, again, command and control and communicate should nuclear weapons be used. Some of you will say that no one can win in a nuclear war. Well, certainly you can paint a scenario to say that it's going to be disastrous beyond compare. Then you can paint a scenario to say, no, it's just another way and means of accomplishing an objective, depending upon the way the weapons are used, the type of weapons that are used, the size of the weapons, the yield, and so on and so forth. And we can continue to go on. And some of you will argue escalation from the tactical to the strategic is inevitable. I don't know why that has to be. It may be, but you can't base your strategy, your plans, your defenses on something like that. Next, please. Continue with the assertions. MAD, mutual assured destruction, equates to stability. Does it really? Is MAD a strategy? What makes something like that work? Is it logical, illogical? There are a whole host of different assessments on whether or not mutual assured destruction really is a ethical, sane approach toward the role that nuclear weapons can play. Continue on here. All-out nuclear war is not rational, and so on and so forth. Okay, so the issue is, how much is enough? What do we want our military forces to do? And many of you will ask, don't we have too many nuclear weapons? Well, let's think that through for just a moment. Next, please. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. I ask one of you, and Mr. President, Madam President, we feel the Secretary Austin calls and says, listen, I think we're under nuclear attack. We've got all of these missiles that are headed our way or whatever. Mr. President, what do you want me to do? Okay. He's not going to say, well, go back to, I'm going back to sleep, call me at 8 o'clock in the morning. That's not going to happen. What is it that is going to occur? And what does a scenario like this mean to our military thinkers and planners who have got to be ready and able to react and respond? Next, please. So let's talk about this notion of overkill. What does it mean? And do we really have far too many nuclear weapons in our stockpile, whether it be ICBMs or weapons on our long-range bombers or our submarines? Do we really have too many? Well, let's just play mental gymnastics for just a moment, because I think, in fact, I know that our colleagues in the Pentagon think through these issues all of the time, as they are supposed to. And so what's the United States going to do? Are we just going to sit around and absorb that first strike? What if we can't respond in time to that first strike? What if we don't react in time? Whatever the case may be. So I'm going to suggest that the planning assumption is we'll absorb that first strike. And secondly, do we really have a ballistic missile defense system that's capable of taking out some of those? Well, anyone that's listening knows that it just does not exist today. So you've got to do some calculations here. Calculations from an enemy first strike or from losses from systems that don't work. And then do you want to have a reserve force that's left over? And what value is that going to be? So again, we're playing mental gymnastics because we've got to think through all of this. And I am absolutely certain that planners in the Pentagon are thinking through all of these scenarios and trying to determine how much is enough and what do we want our forces to do as a result. Next, please. So we got the air component of the strategic nuclear forces. So let's just play mental gymnastics. How many aircraft do you think are going to be available after a first strike? How many of them are going to experience mechanical problems en route to their target, wherever their target is, and they have to turn around? How many are engaged by hostile fire and destroyed before they can reach their target? How many warheads that are launched don't reach their target? And so on and so forth. So all of these factors become issues that have to go into the calculation of how much you need and how much you need to have to be prepared. Next, please. Our ICBM force, how many of them are going to survive that first strike or survive a second strike or survive a third strike? How many of them don't launch when they're fired? Boy, wouldn't that be a mess? How many don't get to their target for mechanical reasons? And we can hope we got the calculations done right. It may not be. How many don't detonate when they reach their target? I mean, these are all issues that have to go into the calculations of what it is you need in your forces. Next, please. And you just play mental gymnastics trying to think these issues through. Do you want to have a reserve force after all is said and done? How much? Where? What? What is the value of a deterrent warfighting strategic nuclear forces that are going to be available after that strike? And can you deter war? Can you prevent further use of nuclear weapons based upon what you have and where they're at and the survivability of that? And what might the United States want as a post-war capability? I'm not suggesting that these weapons be used. I'm just telling you what might be some of the considerations, some of the thinking that will occur through our leadership as to what they want to do. And so to our military folks out there who are trying to make recommendations to our civilian leadership, these are some of the issues that they need to take into account. Next, please. Oh, there's the third planning assumption. What are our strategic forces designed to do? Are we only concerned with the Russian Federation? Russia and China? Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, China only? Tell me what it is you want the forces to be designed to do, what you want our forces to protect, and then our planners can more reasonably address the numbers that we currently have, are planning to have, or what we can do without. Next, please. I learned from this book, Nuclear War Survival Skills, as a young officer as I was going through my military training. Next, please. But here's the edition that's out today, 2022, Nuclear War Survival Skills. I suspect that all of those in uniform have a copy of this and have studied it and read it. I know they haven't, but you would think that they would. Even the chemical officers that are focused on understanding the implications of nuclear use, many of them have never seen this. It is something that that is as applicable today as it was decades ago. Next, please. So I highlight, when I was a young officer, and I'm looking back into the 70s, we had a number of staff manuals that we used, that we studied, that we learned from, that we debated and discussed on employment doctrine and procedures. Those existed then. Do they exist today? I don't think so. Next, please. This is the document, the joint publication that exists today. It's the most recent document that I have seen available to the public. It does not clearly tell the men and women in our military what it is they must do and be prepared for. That is of concern, at least from my perspective, as I'm trying to think through what we want our forces to be able to do and how to go about doing it. Next, please. So here's the bottom line. What do you want our military forces to do on the nuclear realm? Should they be trained? Should they be prepared? And therefore, what logistics measures need to be in place? You know that during the Cold War, after, I guess it was during the Eisenhower administration, that the military fundamentally changed the way they were approaching nuclear war. We had, in fact, the whole policy and doctrine of massive retaliation during the Eisenhower administration resulted in the Army completely revising their division structure into the Potomac Division, which was designed to fight, survive, and sustain in a radiological environment. Are our organizational structures in the land, air, maritime organizations trained and prepared and ready to do that? Is that the best way to deter and prevent war? That's the bottom line. Next, please. Oh, haven't mentioned a terrorist organization acquiring a nuclear weapon. That's another issue that we need to think through. And what does that mean? How do we think that through, prepare, plan, organize? I've highlighted before, I think the Russians, I know, think very differently about the use of nuclear weapons on the battlefield. That's a fact. That's not fiction. And therefore, what does that mean? What should that mean for our forces? And then you can look around the world, India, Pakistan. I used to think some time ago that would probably be the next place where nuclear weapons would be used in anger. Not so sure. We may see it at other places a lot sooner. And then how do you look at some of these? Some nations, Saudi Arabia's political leadership has said that if Iran develops a nuclear weapon, they're going to get one. There was a recent survey in South Korea where South Koreans a number of South Koreans do not trust and believe that the American deterrent, when it comes to protecting them in such an environment, is reliable. And therefore, a number of South Koreans are saying we need to have nuclear weapons, our own stockpile. What does that mean for stability in the area? Those of you that are following the Japanese press, it's amazing that there are a number of elected political leaders that are suggesting that Japan become a nuclear weapon state, either for their own self-protection because of the neighborhood they live in, or because they don't trust that the United States will be there, that our extended deterrence is viable. So again, I throw out these issues because there's a whole host of them out there that need to be addressed. Next, please. These are sort of the issues that I challenge anybody to think through and to consider. because as professionals in this field, you need to have answers to these fundamental questions. And if I was in a classroom with you today, I would be asking each of you to share your thoughts and your perspectives, because I know that there are people out there that think very differently about this. I understand that. But we've got to have that discussion. We've got to debate these issues, and we've got to have a clear understanding of what this means and what the overall concerns are. Next, please. Margaret Thatcher. Next, please. The picture of a Trinity site. Go to the final graphic, please. Final graphic. This is just a couple of my students from Missouri State that were at Ground Zero and posted this picture that I have used there. Both are Army officers that are serving in various capacities around the world now. So with that, that concludes the formal briefing that I wanted to share with you, the thoughts, the ideas, the concepts, and I welcome any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, General Rose. I'm going to turn it over to my president, James Petrosky. If he always has a question, so I figure it's turn it over to him. And Jim, take it away.
You know, John, you might see I'm prepared, and I echo your comments on having the preparedness manuals. Wow, what I put into questions. It's great to hear a perspective that I haven't heard for a very long time in terms of being prepared. And my question is related to our deterrence role. And we often say that deterrence is an effect instead of a mission. And I'd be curious about your comments about that, because I think deterrence has a role, but it's the effect of being prepared, not. Well, I'll listen to your comments. I'll leave mine alone. But I'd be interested in your comments on that from a deterrence standpoint.
Listen, can it be both? And I think it needs to be both. Certainly, it's a mission, it's a goal, it's a focus, it's a direction. We all want to deter war. There's no question about it. The issue is, how do you best do that? And I cannot help and believe, reflecting my own experience and perspective, that you've got to convince your adversary that they're not going to succeed. They don't have a chance, or they're going to sustain a significant amount of pain if they do. That's the effect. And if you don't show that you are capable of inflicting that effect, and that you are prepared and ready, offensively, defensively, then you're going to run into some very serious troubles, as opposed to, let's say, doing nothing. You know what's going to happen if you do nothing, but is that really what we want to do? I wish this whole discussion of deterrence, deterrence is a concept, it's a thought, it's a wonderful thought, and many can argue that it has worked. Will it always work? And if not, then what are the options?
General, thanks for that. I have two questions. The first one is Admiral Richard, who is now retired as our commander of U.S. Strategic Forces, spoke recently at a conference that I was helped put together by the Minot Task Force 21, it's called. We did that here in September. And he testified before Congress, and this is what he said. He said, if the bad guys introduce nuclear weapons into a conventional conflict, all our conventional conflict assumptions, which is our superior technology, wins. He used a phrase, and he said, nothing holds. In short, we don't win conventionally. And the question I have is, people who want to avoid having to use nuclear weapons as a deterrent say, oh, we'll just improve our conventional capability. But if Admiral Richard is right, that any introduction of nuclear weapons by the bad guys, doesn't matter how good your conventional forces are, it ain't going to work. What's your sense of that? I'm not arguing don't improve your conventional capability. I'm
Yep.
not arguing that at all. I'm just saying that if the bad guys think they can introduce nuclear weapons in a conventional conflict and get away with it, then our conventional capability is not beside the point, but it isn't going to sustain deterrence.
I agree, Peter, totally. We cannot stop or slow down our conventional capability. I mean, there are so many aspects and dimensions to this. I mean, there's a cyber dimension, there's a space dimension that all need to be taken into account, and so many others. And we've seen how this technology has changed. Tell me what size and shape we think an adversary, the nuclear weapons that they would use are. And I think I can better address, or we can better address, what are going to be the ways around that. What is it we're investing in terms of our defensive capabilities that will neutralize or take out an incoming nuclear weapon, or weapons that are at their site before they're even launched? Peter, it's a great question, but there are so many aspects and dimensions to that it's hard to say what might be the overall impact. You got to be able to take out the command and control of your adversary, and maybe doing that will create some complications in terms of their ability to execute. Conventional weapons in and of themselves have been unbelievably successful. The United States doesn't get enough credit for the improvements to our conventional weaponry that are designed to reduce collateral damage, to reduce dangers, to effects to innocence. Yet it seems like that the general public doesn't always agree and support that. But nuclear weapons it's a very, very different technology, and it has different effects. And we've got to be prepared for those effects. I don't believe nuclear weapons in and of themselves are going to be the final determinant, but it's going to be an integration of both the conventional and the nuclear that are going to show the final effect and result.
My next question, General, has to do with Mr. Putin and Ukraine. I think Mark Schneider has calculated that Mr. Putin close to 40 times has explicitly threatened the use of nuclear weapons against NATO or Ukraine if we went too far, which is either conventional strikes inside Russia, which is now occurring, or if NATO becomes involved formally into the war, like American NATO forces. So the question is now, are Mr. Putin's threats bluff?
I don't think they are bluff. Yeah.
Walk through that for me, or for us.
Here's our dilemma. NATO and the United States cannot afford to allow Putin to seize, hold, and occupy Ukraine, period. Putin, by the same token, cannot afford or be seen as a loser, and he will not. Therefore, where does that put us? I would not be at all surprised to see Putin use small yield nuclear weapons against Ukraine in order to send a message. I would not be surprised to hear that a high yield nuclear weapon was exploded out of the atmosphere for EMP effects, electromagnetic effects. I just wouldn't be surprised. We know how to address that. We know how to deal with that. But what would that impact mean psychologically to the Ukrainian people? What would that mean in terms of where these weapons were used, how they were used, and how effective they were? They could be used ineffectively, and therefore not have the overall result. How will the Ukrainians react and respond to something like that? To a certain extent, I keep thinking what could bring this to an end somehow. I'm somewhat surprised that Zelensky hasn't been assassinated yet. I know the Russians have tried, hasn't worked. He's got a great security detail around him, Or what if there's some sort of revolt and takeover in Russia? I mean, again, playing mental gymnastics with how this is going. The battlefield itself seems to be at somewhat of a stalemate. And where is this going to go? Boy, I got to tell you, having gotten to know several hundred Ukrainian military when I was at the Marshall Center, I've got to tell you, they are a determined group of men and women that are not going to roll over. And there's not going to be a sense of stability or peace in Ukraine if Russia gets in. Peter, I know I haven't answered the question as well and as comprehensively as you would think, but Putin has had chances, and why he hasn't exercised nuclear weapons to some limited impact up to this point in time. I'm not sure. Would he? I just would not be at all surprised. The issue is, are the Ukrainian military prepared, and have they read James's book that on nuclear war survival skills, and what are they doing about it?
Interesting. One of our guests today is Dave Trachtenberg, who is the vice president of the National Institute of Public Policy, which is his boss, Keith Payne, and he are critically important to Missouri State University and have been running that program in graduate studies for decades. And I just wanted to acknowledge David. Thank you for joining us today. And if you have any questions, just use the chat function or the Q&A function, and Alex will let you in to ask a direct question of the general if you would wish, because I want to thank you for coming aboard. David is an old friend, many, many decades, and one of the great things I call attention to a new publication that he, Michaela Dodge, and Keith Payne and Matt Kuslow have put together, calling "What are the problems with arms control in terms of how they affect America's preparedness and our ability to deter," which goes to Jim Petrosky asked that same question, sir. Does arms control, as we have done it over the last 4 decades, does that have an impact on our ability to prepare for fighting?
Arms control. First of all, the Honorable David Trachtenberg, I'm honored and delighted that he would participate in something like this. And I have a copy of this most recent article. I have not read it yet. I guarantee you that I'll bet it's going to be something that's going to spark a great deal of interest, and it would be something that I would recommend to all of the listeners on here to take a look at to better understand the issues. Arms control, there can be very meaningful, viable, workable arms control agreements. There can be agreements that are cosmetic in nature, are promissory in nature. Some that really, you got to show me that there is value and that it enhances the security and stability, which is our goal in reducing our weapons. That would have an effect. There's nothing inherently wrong with arms control, but it's got to be meaningful. It's got to reduce the threat more than it's going to cost us to build up to react to other threats. So in and of itself, there's nothing wrong with it, but you've got to show me that you've got parties, 2 parties or more, that are going to be interested in making meaningful changes, meaningful reductions. Certainly less, like I said, look at the calculations that our military have to take into account when they determine how many nuclear weapons do we need, what types, where, what sizes, what locations, how they have to think all of those things and put it into place. We've got to look at where our adversary is and what they have got. Peter, Maybe I'd have a better answer after I've read the Trachtenberg Payne and Dodge piece. But
Well, it's interesting in that David also wrote earlier this year, I believe in July, an essay on the over-promising of arms control benefits. And I think one of our colleagues has posted the link to that. And then also there's a link, he also put on a link with from an article in Real Clear Defense about the lack of a two-war strategy erodes extended deterrence and assurance, which is also true. So, but David wrote a piece back in 2021, and it was called Overselling and Underperforming the Exaggerated History of Arms Control Achievements, which 100% concur was a great piece. And now they followed it up with a new one. Do we have any questions from David?
It looks like David's got the mic. You just need to come off of the mute there, David, and he's got the floor. I'll unmute you, Dave.
Yeah, I unmuted him earlier.
Oh, back on mute. So maybe you can post to the chat, David, because we're
So
not able to.
you have mic and camera rights, David. You just need to on your end open the mic. All right. Does anyone else also have questions? You can do the hand emoji, and I'll give you the right to use your mic and camera, but on your end, you still need to unmute yourselves.
Yeah, I would like to, before David comes on, I'd like to put forward a very, the New York Times bestselling book by Annie Jacobson on nuclear war. Makes one of the points that you laid out, and she says, any use of nuclear weapons will result in the all-out use of nuclear weapons. So deterrence, she says, is mad, M-A-D, not mutual assured destruction. She says it's mad, it's crazy. And she doesn't say quite, okay, what's the alternative? Except for she says, well, we have to emphasize diplomacy. But my question in my reviews of her book is that diplomacy to do what? Because if you're going to do arms control doesn't get rid of deterrence unless you're talking about abolition, and no one is talking about abolition occurring anytime within in our lifetime, let alone the next decade or something. So I'm sure you're familiar with her book. And the question in my mind is, once you say deterrence will end up in Armageddon, I think you've weakened deterrence and you make the use of military force more likely. I'd like your comment on that.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. What's going to make diplomacy work? What's going to make diplomacy really be a viable option? And it probably will be well, you got to have some reason to bring your adversary to the table, and having a deterrent capability, having a defensive capability, having the means that you can reflect and show your adversary that you have available to defend yourself, to defend your country, to defend your strategic forces, to defend your population and or whatever. That's what's going to bring about diplomacy. And I do not see that the use of a small yield nuclear weapon is going to result in multi-megaton weapons being used. I don't see that at all. I think there is such a thing as interwar deterrence and deterrence at various levels. You got to see how this is going to play out. And listen, our adversaries, and we know full well what the implications are from a multi-megaton weapon that is fired at one of our cities or to take out any of our forces. We know what that is, and I just unless you're dealing with people that are just absolutely insane, crazy, then that may be the option or the alternative. But no, I do not. I do not see that. I just would strongly disagree with her overall perspective. I agree with diplomacy. I mean, you want diplomacy, but how are you going to get them to the table?
I just would make a note that Dave Trachtenberg sent in a message, and he says he appreciates the references to the various articles that he and Keith and others have written. But he did say John's presentation is spot on, and this issue is of critical importance, which I would, of course, second on that. Professor, you're aware of the Posture Commission report that came out almost a year ago. And we have heard from Madeline Creedon, and we have heard from Matt Kronig, and some others who are critically important to this. What's your sense of particularly their recommendations? What would you highlight as the most important that we go forward with?
Based upon my reading of that document, and I believe Rebecca Heinrichs was a participant on that, who is just one of our recent doctoral graduates. My focus would be on the defensive measures, on the defensive actions that need to be taken, either to enhance our defensive capability, whether that be missile defense, whether that be command and control, or whatever, and then secondly, the best way to deter nuclear war is through the strength and viability of our strategic nuclear forces. There is more than sufficient evidence to suggest that there are a number of things we need to do to improve our posture. And we're behind, it appears, on some of the new initiatives that are available, that could be funded, that could be enacted. That is where I would put my focus and my attention, on improving our offensive capability, because that is what's going to prevent, I think, an adversary from thinking twice, and then ensuring that we've got the command, the control, the communications redundancy that will allow us to protect those forces. And then you can't do enough on defensive measures to protect your forces and to protect your people than with what we know of now as missile defense. And there are a number of different components of that. So it's not just a given missile in and of itself.
Thank you. I'm going to turn it back over to our Chief of Staff, Alex, because it's 10:58 and he has a couple housekeeping things have to do. Plus, we have an event this afternoon at 2 o'clock. Over to you, Alex. And again, thank you, Professor, for a wonderful presentation. I want to thank Jim Petrosky for joining us, our president. Over to you, Alex.
Thank you, Peter. And thank you so much, Professor Rose, for that excellent presentation and message that unfortunately not more people are sharing. You're always welcome to share these events with your network. Any last words from you, Professor Rose?
I thank you, Alex, and to James and Peter. I sincerely appreciate it. I thank all of those that participated. I'm deeply honored to have this opportunity, and if anyone is interested in expanding their knowledge, their insights, their understanding of defense and strategic studies, then we at Missouri State would be delighted to talk to you about our program. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.